There's a silent conflict unfolding right now in the Middle East, and while most people aren't paying attention to it yet, it has the potential to directly impact the global economy in ways that could hit everyday life across the United States and beyond. Because this situation is not just about politics, military movements, or distant geopolitical tension. It is fundamentally about oil, the single most critical resource that keeps modern economies running. And more importantly, it is about a narrow and extremely strategic waterway known as the Strait of Hormuz, a small passage between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, through which nearly 20% of the world's total oil supply flows every single day, making it one of the most important choke points in the entire global energy system. And the reason this matters so much right now is because tensions between major players like the United States, Israel, and Iran have been steadily rising, with increasing reports of military activity, threats to commercial oil tankers, and growing instability in the region, all of which are creating uncertainty in global markets. And when it comes to oil, uncertainty alone is enough to trigger major price movements, because markets don't wait for a full-scale crisis to happen. They react to the possibility of disruption. And that's exactly why oil prices have already begun climbing, crossing the $100 per barrel mark and raising concerns among analysts that if the situation escalates further, prices could surge to $120, $150, or even higher in a relatively short period of time. And while that might sound like just another headline number, the reality is that rising oil prices have a direct and powerful impact on almost every aspect of the global economy, especially in a country like the United States, where energy consumption is deeply tied to transportation, logistics, and consumer activity. Because when oil becomes more expensive, it doesn't just make gasoline more costly at the pump, it increases the cost of transporting goods, it raises manufacturing expenses, it pushes airline ticket prices higher, and it even affects the price of food, since agriculture relies heavily on fuel for machinery, production, and distribution, which means that a sustained increase in oil prices can quickly translate into broader inflation across the economy, making everyday goods and services more expensive for consumers. And this creates a significant challenge for policymakers, particularly the Federal Reserve, which is already dealing with inflation concerns, because higher oil prices can force the Fed to keep interest rates elevated for longer than expected in order to control rising costs. And higher interest rates, in turn, make borrowing more expensive, which affects everything from mortgages and car loans to business investments and economic growth, slowing down overall economic activity and putting pressure on both consumers and companies. And at the same time, financial markets tend to react negatively to this kind of uncertainty because rising energy costs can squeeze corporate profit margins, especially in industries that rely heavily on transportation and logistics, such as airlines, shipping companies, and retail businesses, leading to increased volatility in the stock market as investors try to assess the potential impact of an oil-driven shock. And although energy companies may benefit from higher oil prices, the broader market often struggles under the weight of rising costs and reduced consumer spending. And this dynamic is not new, as history has repeatedly shown that oil shocks can have significant economic consequences, from the oil crises of the 1970s that triggered widespread inflation and economic stagnation to more recent geopolitical tensions that have caused sudden spikes in energy prices and market instability, demonstrating a clear pattern that when oil prices rise too quickly or too sharply, the global economy tends to feel the strain. And what makes the current situation particularly concerning is the fact that it is unfolding at a time when the global economy is already facing multiple challenges, including the aftermath of high inflation, elevated interest rates, and ongoing uncertainty in financial markets, which means that an additional shock in the form of a major oil price spike could amplify existing pressures and increase the risk of an economic slowdown or even a recession in some regions. And this is why analysts and governments are closely monitoring developments in the the Middle East, especially any signs that the Strait of Hormuz could be disrupted, because even a temporary blockage or reduction in oil flow through this critical passage could have immediate and severe consequences for global supply, leading to sharp price increases and potential panic in financial markets. And in a worst-case scenario, where the strait is significantly blocked or conflict escalates into a broader regional war, the impact could be dramatic, with oil supply dropping rapidly, prices skyrocketing, and governments around the world scrambling to secure alternative energy sources and stabilize their economies. And for the average person, particularly in the United States, the effects of such a scenario would likely be felt through higher gas prices, increased costs of living, and greater economic uncertainty as businesses adjust to rising expenses and consumers face tighter budgets. And while these developments may seem distant or abstract at first, the interconnected nature of the global economy means that events in one region can quickly ripple across the world, affecting markets, industries, and households in ways that are both immediate and long-lasting. And this is why understanding the relationship between geopolitical tensions, oil supply, and economic outcomes is so important, because it provides insight into how seemingly distant events can translate into real-world financial impacts. And ultimately, the key takeaway from this entire situation is that the global economy remains highly dependent on stable energy flows, and any disruption to that stability, especially in a critical location like the Strait of Hormuz, has the potential to trigger a chain reaction that extends far beyond the region itself, influencing everything from inflation and interest rates to stock market performance and everyday living costs. And while it is impossible to predict exactly how the situation will unfold, the risks are real, the stakes are high, and the consequences could be significant, which is why this silent conflict, often overlooked by the general public, may turn out to be one of the most important economic stories of our time, shaping financial conditions and influencing policy decisions in ways that could affect millions of people across the globe, including those who may not even realize that the source of rising prices and economic pressure can be traced back to a narrow stretch of water thousands of miles away, where the world's oil supply continues to pass under increasing uncertainty.